I have another completely outrageous story for you all today. Early on in the pandemic, this was something that very few people were talking about. But during the initial height of the pandemic, when New York was being ravaged and the infections and the deaths were out of control, they had bodies piled up in trucks outside of the morgues. They had to dig mass graves to dump people because they was so many deaths that they just couldn't keep up with it. It was really something that none of us have ever seen in this country in our lifetime. And the governor of New York, for no reason other than the fact that he's a Democrat and the fact that the media loves him because he's arguably because he's a Democrat. For no other reason, there was this false image, this narrative that Andrew Cuomo was actually on top of it, and he was doing everything he can to get the virus under control. It was just whatever he did, everything humanly possible to limit the infections, to limit the deaths from COVID in New York. But whatever happened, it was just uncontrollable. And hey, man, it's a big state. They have big cities, so the deaths were just inevitable. That was the narrative that was being pushed out in the media. And if you really cared to look into this, that didn't really hold up, because New York, yes, it is extremely populated. Biggest city in the country is in New York, granted. But why is it the deaths and infections in New York were just so way beyond anything else, not just in the United States, but anywhere else around the world? And of course, there were many infections, many deaths happening in other countries around the world, but it was nowhere close to what was happening in New York. The reality was that Cuomo wasn't doing everything he can to contain the virus. He wasn't doing everything he could to protect the citizens of New York. He was, as always, with the Democrats and the Republicans too, with this corrupt political system that we have in this country. His top priority, even in the height of a fucking pandemic and emergency, his top priority was how can he best serve his corporate donors. And I can't give you the exact date, but then not too far into the pandemic, we learned that Cuomo signed an to allow nursing homes to accept COVID patients, infected COVID patients. And this led to a wild spread of COVID throughout the nursing home systems in New York. So it's not like this was something that was unavoidable. He signed that executive order, and because of that, led to thousands and thousands of deaths. And the speculation is, and it's not really speculation, they would have made more money doing this. Even though that was objectively the best move to do in the middle of a pandemic, to keep them separated from the people who are most susceptible to dying from the disease. But just so that they can make a couple more dollars, they pressured Cuomo to sign that executive order, and then on top of that, granted them immunity from any type of that was the initial corporate liability shield. So he shielded the nursing homes from any lawsuits, from the infections and the outbreaks that came about from their decision to accept COVID positive patients into the nursing homes. So he sent them there, and then he gave them liability and protection and legal shielding from any type of ramifications from that obviously disastrous decision. So even then, it was anybody who's really paying attention. Cuomo wasn't some hero like the media was portraying him. He was a fucking villain just as much as Trump, as corrupt and on purpose incompetent and inept as Donald Trump was. On purpose trying to downplay the situation and trying to sweep it under the rug. Cuomo was just as guilty of that as Donald Trump was. And so last week, an even more damning evidence into Cuomo's responsibility for the thousands and thousands of deaths in New York. The New York government updates the official death toll and the death toll in the nursing homes, because I believe previously, before last week or the week before, they had the official death tolls in the nursing home from COVID at 8,000. Somewhere around 8,000. It was more than 8,000, but it wasn't 9,000 yet. And so they updated the numbers and they increased the deaths by 50%. And this wasn't some rounding error. It wasn't an accident. Somebody didn't move a comma or a decimal point. They added the 4,000 deaths. And so now the official deaths in the nursing home, and I'm sure it's way more than this, but the official deaths in the nursing home went from 8,000 to over 12,000 deaths. And again, all because of this mostly because of this executive order and the recklessness and the corruption from Andrew Cuomo. That's what led to the out of control deaths in the nursing home from COVID. But on top of that, Andrew Cuomo's office, his top aides, in a video conference with other New York State politicians, they admitted to covering it up. They admitted to a brazen cover-up. And the reason that they give was so sleazy and so disgusting and such bullshit that you won't even believe it when I tell you. So basically, the reason that they gave for why they intentionally lied to the public about the deaths that they were responsible for, that they were directly responsible for. Andrew Cuomo's top aide comes out and says it was basically because Trump bad. That's why we had to lie to the public. That's why we had to cover up the deaths and the blood that was on our hands, because Trump bad. Now let me give you some quotes from this video conference where Andrew Cuomo's top aide made this damning admission. She said, quote, "We froze out of fear because they thought that the numbers would be, quote, used against them by the federal government." She says, quote, "Right around the same time, then President Donald Trump turns this into a giant political football. He starts tweeting that we killed everyone in nursing homes. He starts going after New Jersey governor. He starts going after the California governor. He starts going after the Michigan governor, and says that, quote, Trump directed the Department of Justice to do an investigation into us. And basically, we froze. Because then we were in a position where we weren't sure if what we were going to give the Department of Justice or what we would give to you guys," she's talking to the state lawmakers in New York, "what we start saying was going to be used against us while we weren't sure if there were going to be an investigation." She said that played a very large role into this. So think about what she's saying there for a second. She's acting as if Yes, Donald Trump, of course he would have made a huge political scene out of it and said, oh, look at the Democrats, they trying to put this all on me, but they're fucking up too. Of course he would have done that, of course. But she's acting like just because Trump would have said nasty things about them, that justifies doing a brazen cover-up of deaths that they were responsible for in the middle of a pandemic. How does that make sense? You're saying we thought that he might send federal prosecutors to do an investigation into us over these deaths. Okay, how about this? Maybe Trump should have sent federal prosecutors to lock all your asses up. Because what you did was fucking criminal. But this idea that just because Trump was going to do it, it justifies a cover-up. Because Trump bad, anything he does is bad. Even though the Department of Justice would have been well within their right to do a criminal investigation into Andrew Cuomo and his administration for not only allowing these patients to be sent to the nursing homes, which there is no way that you can't say, there's no way you can say he didn't do that explicitly because it was in the best interest of his corporate donors to allow them to accept these patients in the nursing home. So you can do a corruption investigation into that alone. But also the cover-up, lying and manipulating data in the middle of the worst public health emergency that New York State has faced in our lifetime. And you're going to tell me that you're going to just decide on your own that a criminal investigation isn't warranted, and just because Trump was going to do it, it justifies a cover-up. This is the Trump derangement syndrome that I'm talking about. And how the Democrats, they use Trump as a shield to justify anything. Because all you have to say to the media, all you have to say to the public is, oh, but Trump would have done something bad. So by anything, the ends justify the means. If being straightforward and being honest with the public about what was happening, about the deaths that we were responsible for, if that led to Trump getting any type of political win, if it led to Trump getting any type of talking point that would have made him look better than we do, oh, well then of course we're justified in doing a brazen cover-up and lying to the public. Of course. And then people, I don't know how much regular people are going to believe this shit. I don't know how much they're going to fall for this. But the media, I'm not seeing much scrutiny from the media on this. In fact, even after we already knew about the executive order, even after the New York was leading the world in COVID deaths, had more deaths than any other country in the fucking world in New York State. And again, because of the recklessness and corruption of Andrew Cuomo. Even after we knew all of that, the media was still sucking off Andrew Cuomo. They were still broadcasting his daily press briefings as if it were a gift from God. I'm not making this up. He was nominated for a fucking Emmy because he was doing daily press briefings during the height of COVID in New York. Nominated for an Emmy because he was going out and lying to the public, engaging in a cover-up to hide the deaths that he was responsible for in this pandemic. Nominated for a fucking Emmy by the media. The media singing his praises. He was on CNN often doing softball interviews with his brother, Chris Cuomo, who is one of the top hosts at CNN, doing softball interviews, no scrutiny into his responsibility for the death, just sucking him off. Oh, you're doing such a great job. I know 100,000 people are dead in New York, and that ain't anywhere near the amount of deaths in France, nowhere near the amount of deaths in the UK, nowhere near the amount of deaths in not even in China, not in Russia, nowhere else around the world. But oh, my big brother Andrew Cuomo, you're doing such a great job. So the media was out there doing propaganda, even though all the facts were there, that if anybody even really cared to look into this, they would know not only is he responsible for the large majority of those deaths, but he also covered it up and was lying about the actual death toll. And again, that's another thing. They severely were downplaying the amount of deaths, all while we're seeing mass graves being dug up in New York, all while we're seeing trucks piled up with dead bodies outside of the morgue because they're so overflowing. And they were still trying to downplay and act like not as many people were dying as actually were. So, and this is another thing why I cannot for the life of me understand why the media keeps just taking the official numbers from the government, the death tolls, the infection rates. They keep taking it as if it's gospel and it's just straight from the mouth of God. And you cannot question these. Oh, they said 3,000 people died in this country from COVID today. Oh, I guess 3,000 people died. And there is absolutely no skepticism and no hesitation to just repeat the propaganda coming from the government when we know they've been lying about this every step of the way. And it's not just Cuomo. It's basically every governor and the federal government have been lying about this from the beginning. But still, this doesn't, for the media, doesn't call for massive scrutiny and skepticism in these official numbers. And then the other point I want to make about this, look at the power of propaganda. Look at the power of all the bullshit narrative coming from the media about how the Democrats believe in science. The Democrats will handle COVID better. The Democrats, if you put them in charge, you better believe they'll keep this thing contained. There'll be the minimum amount of deaths, and all the deaths are because Trump bad, Republicans bad, and that's the end of the story. All of that is propaganda, because at the end of the day, the Democrats are just as reckless and just as incompetent on purpose in handling this virus. Like I said, New York was leading the country in deaths. Democratic governor, Democratic state house, Democratic, the entire state legislature run by Democrats. The cities run by Democrats. And again, leading the country in death, leading the world in deaths and in infections. But still, the propaganda it's only the Republicans who don't believe in science. It's only the Republicans who are the cause of these out of control COVID numbers. Again, in these states and these areas run completely by Democrats, that's where the virus is raging out of control. New York, and then later it was California and New Jersey. So it was one hell of a propaganda campaign during the general election, put on by the media, put on by Democratic apparatchiks, to just drill into people's head that the Democrats believe in science, and then they do have some secret plan to deal with COVID, but nobody has presented an actual serious plan to get the virus under control. But we all had to vote for Joe Biden because he'd handle it better than Trump. He isn't handling it better than Trump. The Democrats have complete control of government, as they had for over a month now. And they still have no serious plan to get the virus under control. Yeah, they have the virus, the vaccine, they're distributing the vaccine, and millions of people are getting the vaccine. Yes, that's true. But that has nothing to do with them. That was already in motion from the Trump administration. So, again, and it's not me saying Trump is better on COVID. Fuck no. But this idea that the Democrats are competent, the Democrats, they're the serious people, they're the adults in the room. You can trust them. All you have to do is put them in power. They get this under control and you don't have to worry about anything. That is a lie. That is propaganda. Look what Andrew Cuomo did in New York. Look what Joe Biden's doing now. Somebody tell me what Joe Biden's plan is to get the virus under control and to deal with the economic crisis. He doesn't have one. He hasn't passed a single piece of major legislation to address the virus or to address the economic crisis. This failure from our government in this time of crisis, in this unprecedented emergency, is so unforgivable. Anybody who is in office right now should be run out of town. I don't know how anybody who was sitting in Congress during all of this managed to win re-election. And I mean everyone, even the best of them, even Bernie Sanders, even AOC, even Ilhan Omar, because they've all failed to do what is necessary to protect the public, to contain the virus, and to address this unprecedented economic crisis. They have all failed. And there is not an ounce of reflection. There is no urgency to change course and to take this seriously. It's the wild fucking West. And whatever happens, happens. If you catch it and die, you catch it and die. If you catch it and go bankrupt, you went bankrupt. If you lost your job because of it, oh well, don't know what to tell you. They have just abdicated any responsibility they have to serve the public, again, in the middle of the worst emergency of our lifetimes. This is unconscionable. And again, I don't know how the public is just accepting this. I don't know how they're just going about their everyday life and people aren't railing against the government. There are massive protests. And again, what you would think that something like this would lead to massive protests across the country. And of course, they played a role in the Black Lives Matter protests. It played a role in the Stop the Steal protest and riot in the Capitol. But there really hasn't been a rebuke from the public of the government, how they've handled the economic crisis and how they've handled the pandemic. It's just almost like we've just, like I always say, people have just gotten so used to the government not doing shit for them that almost feel like the government doesn't even have a responsibility to do anything to contain the virus or to handle the economic crisis. So this is just bonkers. This story is crazy. Andrew Cuomo, his administration, everybody who played a role in this should be in fucking prison. And the idea that, oh, it's okay that we covered it up because Trump would have put us in prison. Who gives a fuck? You should have been there anyway. Don't matter if Trump put you there. Don't matter if Obama put you there. Doesn't matter if Biden put you there. Doesn't matter if Abraham fucking Lincoln put you in prison. What you did was fucking criminal and led to the deaths of thousands and thousands of people unnecessarily. And then on top of that, you participated in a criminal cover-up to cover your own asses. So, again, public, I have no idea how anybody trusts the government, how anybody trusts the public health officials, because they've been lying and fucking us over this entire time, and they shouldn't be trusted.